Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you calling this hearing, as well as your great work on expanding choices for our veterans. And Mr. Undersecretary, I do appreciate your statement that choice is now the default option for care outside the VA, and I'll look forward to some description of how you made changes to make certain that happens. What I want to ask, a couple things. First of all, I find out in this committee we have a lot of differences across our districts, and some have more or less providers, but in my congressional district we have about 70 community hospitals and 0 VA hospitals. And what I'm hearing from those hospitals is a tremendous difficulty of getting into as an approved provider. They can do it for Medicare, they certainly can do it for TRICARE, but it's extremely difficult. I would like to ask the TriWest folks is, what does the VA need to do to make sure these community hospitals that want to serve veterans get in and become an approved provider? What can we do differently?
Well, I think we should compare notes, because we have a fairly sizable network built out in Kansas, and it may be that some think they're not under contract because we used to do the TRICARE work in the state of Kansas, and they actually in fact have a network contract to do the work for this work. And actually Dr. Tushmit and I discovered that similar problem in Bend, Oregon, didn't we, sir? Where someone decided to light both of us on fire, and at the end of the day, within a couple hours, they were trying to explain why it was that they had mistaken the fact that they actually were under contract. So I would look forward to that dialogue. We have a broad footprint in Kansas. If we need to add it, we will definitely make that happen, because we're responsible for making sure that the care is accessible.
Right, and I appreciate that, and maybe it's the folks at the VA that are answering the phone, because it is still extremely difficult. We have veterans that are making it through the system and getting those choices, as I've talked about again and again in this committee. It's usually they talk about hours to get to a provider when they have a local hospital down the road, and they're still not getting the yeses that they need. And one of the other things, as far as yeses, I'd like the Undersecretary to know about this. At Fort Riley, which is in my district as well, they're building a brand new hospital. And there's sometimes they say it takes years for the VA and the DOD to come together to agreement, and the CBOC there is limited primary care. Actually, all the CBOCs are very limited, which I want to get to another question, but I wanted the Undersecretary to understand that the folks there would like access. They could serve 10 years. At Fort Riley, they like to step off the base and turn around and still access their care that they've been doing as well. So the last question, Mr. Secretary, would be in reference to the hardship exemption. And how far can you stretch that to meet the needs of these veterans of rural communities to get past this artificial 40-mile barrier and say, hey, you know what, the CBOCs are not offering the care.
Right.
And it makes no sense to calculate 40 miles to a place that doesn't offer anything other than maybe primary care, maybe 4 days a week, maybe 1 day a week, and describe how we can expand that and meet those needs.
First, very briefly, everywhere I go, I find a very strong relationship between the local VA and DOD medical facilities. I'll make sure, I've not been to Kansas yet, but I will make sure that we are working to build that relationship with Fort Riley. Secondly, the second question is
hardship exemption.
Hardship exemption. Thank you.
How we can use the current law and still expand beyond this artificial 40
well, the flexibility that I referred to here and that we're requesting, the way the language is written right now, it has to do with a very limited and very narrow geographic barrier. What we're looking for is much broader discretion, so that, for example, the veteran that you described in your letter, that we would be able to much more liberally address those particular needs for that veteran in terms of the distance traveled, and be able to rely on the choice program to fund that. I would tell you, part of our challenge here, and I didn't get a chance to answer that part of Dr. Rowe's question, as we run even the most conservative assumptions, we're seeing numbers on the order of magnitude of $10 billion a year to just completely open the aperture. And so part of what we're looking at here as an interim solution is the idea that we would have that kind of discretion. And I might say, for example, if a veteran needs a knee replacement, then traveling some considerable distance to get that knee replacement, maybe that's not unreasonable. in order to get it done at a VA hospital. What I don't want to have is that veteran having to travel that same distance to get the physical therapy done after he has the procedure.
And I'm out of time. Mr. Secretary, one last point, and I appreciate that. I'd ask you to look at the hardship exemption to get
Yes.
past this artificial
Yes.
40-mile barrier
Yes.
as well. And as far as your cost estimates, I don't know if you've done the comparison, but I find it hard to believe that you're doing it more effective and more cheaply than our TRICARE and Medicare system, which is dozens and dozens and dozens and perhaps hundreds of choices, and in my congressional district, very few choices for VA. So that's the comparison I'd like to see. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.